Hello, welcome to the channel and welcome to Doctor Who episode ranking. This is season 3 and it's the season that Martha and the Doctor were in. Well, obviously the Doctor was in it. It's the season that Martha was in. Let's roll credits. As usual, multi-part stories will be treated as one, and that leaves us with 9 to choose from in this season. And at number 9, I am putting The Lazarus Experiment. Directed by Richard Clarke and written by Stephen Greenhorn. This is a filler episode, if ever I saw one. And it's worse than that, it's a bad filler episode. The CGI is mediocre, the acting isn't that good, and there is way too much of Martha's sister Tish, which is a character that I was never very keen on. Yeah, the storyline just seems to go nowhere. The Lazarus creature itself is very unimaginative. There is so many ways they could have gone with, you know, even just the basic premise that would have been better than this. I didn't like it on its first viewing, and subsequent viewing has improved its rating in my opinion, but it's still the worst of the season by a long way, I think. The music's good, the music's dramatic, the pace is good, and well, that's about it really. In the end, this episode just disappoints. At number 8, The Daleks in Manhattan and Evolution of the Daleks. Directed by James Strong and written by Helen Rayner. My main problem with this story is that it is in fact 2 parts. It's good, it's strong, but I don't think it carries over the 2 parts very well, and it makes it drag in the middle. That's really only my only real main problem with this. Well, it's not. Didn't really get on with the whole hybrid thing. I mean, I like the concept of the cult of Skaro, but a Dalek trying to be a human just... It didn't work then, it won't work now. It's never been a good idea to introduce that concept. The music, on the other hand, was amazing in this episode. Particularly the song An Angel Put a Devil in Me, or whatever it is called. It's just superb. And the pig creature, whose name I can't remember. The effects on that were really good. A lot better than the pig creature we saw in season 1. So, definite marks for that. Daleks were good, but in the end, I feel that its main good point for this episode was Hooverville and showing the historical elements of the Great Depression and the reality behind it. And I personally would have been happy with A, this being a 1-parter, or B, it focusing purely on the historical elements. We didn't really need the Daleks. They just seemed wasted in this episode, which is a shame. Number 7, The Shakespeare Code. Directed by Charles Palmer and written by Gareth Roberts. I'm really fond of this episode, actually. Dean Lennox Kelly absolutely kills it as Shakespeare. And, I mean, the title gives away what's going to happen, but I wasn't expecting a young Shakespeare. I was expecting an older Shakespeare. And the fun-loving way he's portrayed the absolute sort of legend that Will Shakespeare is, and the way he was portrayed was absolutely fantastic. The Carrionites were pretty solid as villains go. I definitely like the inclusion of more vampire races in this. It goes with one of the many non-canonical parts of the Doctor Who mythos of the great vampires. We saw a little bit of it in classic Who, and I'm glad we're getting more vampiric creatures of that ilk. The only thing I didn't like about this episode really was the way Martha was portrayed, because we saw her in the first episode she was really good, but in this episode she came across as petty and jealous of a girl she's never met and is no longer around and trapped in a parallel universe. Just made her seem, well, yeah, petty. And the bed scene with her and the Doctor was just cringy. And in fact, Martha's adoration of the Doctor was cringy all the way through this episode. But that's my only fault with this, really. It's a fun, fantastical episode with some brilliant special effects on the whole. At number 6, Gridlock. Directed by Richard Clarke again, and written by Russell T Davies, the man himself. Yeah, I love Gridlock. It's such a simple premise, and just it's so beautiful the way it's portrayed. It's got intensity, it's got pace, it's got high stakes right from the start with the kidnapping of Martha. And we get this sort of change around, you know, like first she's kidnapped and then we find out the kidnappers are, you know, sympathetic characters that are just trying to get through this ridiculous situation. We have the Doctor's reaction to this ridiculous situation of being angry and then curious, and then when he finds out what the reality is and he does something about it, it's just a climactic moment that just gives chills. And it's so sad, you know, as the viewer realises exactly why that traffic jam exists. It's heartbreaking. And them singing that song, there are moments in this episode that make me want to put it at number 1, honestly. But the new inclusion of the Macra, you know, or descendants of the Macra, that alone was ingenious. A little bit throwaway as well. But then again, the Macra were never going to be a full focus, centre of attention kind of villain. They're too basic. It's just full of it. It's just full of it. It's just full of beautiful moments, beautiful music, fantastic acting. It has Ardal O'Hanlon in it. I love Ardal O'Hanlon. And it has kittens. It has cute little kittens. In fact, I'm marking it this low just because it feels like it's trying too hard, and the fact that all the other episodes are just awesome. At number 5, we have Smith and Jones, written by Russell T Davies, directed by Charles Palmer, and this was the pilot episode for the season, or the first episode of the season, and it introduced Martha. And it introduced Martha and her family in a really good way. And it made me really like Martha right from the start, which is why I've marked Shakespeare Code down so much, because it seemed like just a drastic change of her character. I'm glad when they actually did settle, they settled on the Smith and Jones version of Martha. The strong, confident, but not too confident, not too full of herself woman. Again, it has rhythm, it has pace, it has brilliant music, It has high stakes. The Judoon were a bit of a surprise when they revealed themselves. I was not expecting space rhinos, but why not? Space rhinos, why not? So that was great. The humour was good. Yeah, it's an all-round, it's a very, very strong first episode. Not the strongest first episode we've had, but more about that later. The Judoon reminded me very much of the Vogons from The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy in their bureaucratic nature. Yeah, they weren't evil, they didn't kill that person because they were bad or they were evil or they wanted to. They did it because they're so bureaucratic and he broke the rules as they saw it. And that's very much what the Vogons in Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy were like. Going so far as to blowing up planets because they just had orders to do so. That's what I like about the Judoon. We didn't really see them ever again. We did, but not much. So number 4, directed by Graham Harper, written by Chris Chibnall, and it's 42. And if ever there was a Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy reference, it's right there. It's 42 minutes to save the ship, and I thought it was brilliant doing a virtual real-time episode. Very imaginative. I don't think it had been done before. Not quite in that way. The stakes again were really high. The music was really intense. In fact, there was hardly any humour in this. The humour it did have was dark. And the episode itself was dark. It was dramatic. It was non-stop. It was relentless. In fact, I think it was a little bit too much because I kind of find this episode a little bit forgettable. I can watch it and so much happens that I barely take it all in. I barely took it all in on the first watch, and 5-6 watches down the road and I'm still not entirely sure I've got everything in it. I still come away thinking, oh, what happened there again with that character? I'm not saying that this is a bad thing, like to have this very, very serious episode. In fact, I like having a deadly serious episode once in a while. It's not supposed to be all light-hearted. But I find 42 just too much. Just too much. I know it's going to be top of the list in most people's ranking for this season. If not top, then nearly the top. But I can only justify it as number 4 because number 3, Utopia, The Sound of Drums and The Last of the Time Lords. Utopia, directed by Graham Harper, and the others directed by Colin Teague, and all of it written by Russell T Davies. Russell T Davies. Right, the official lists put this as a 3-parter. So that's the way I've treated it, but I don't like that. I kind of regard it as a 1-parter followed by a 2-parter. Why do I do this? Because Sound of Drums and Last of the Time Lords are not as good as Utopia. Utopia is such an awesome episode. It makes the other 2 episodes, which are good in their own right, look like piles of poo. And they're not, but Utopia is just amazing. It's got, well, you know what it's got. It's got Derek Jacobi as the War Master. It's got that big reveal. And to us classic Who fans, that was an epic moment. That was mind-blowing. We probably, I for one, had kind of forgotten that the Master even was a thing by this point. I was so involved in NuWho. And with the first time I watched it with a friend, and it's a funny story because he didn't really know Classic Who. He only knew NuWho. And we're watching it together, and Derek Jacobi's doing that sound of drums thing, getting the things in his head. I'm going, oh, that's... And then we get the fob watch, and I'm thinking, that's a Time Lord. That's right. Which Time Lord? Which Time Lord? And I started to become convinced that it might be the Master. May it be the Master? There's plenty of others it could be at this point. And remembering we're thinking that they're all dead at this point. So, which one is this? And as he's revealing himself to Chantho, that's not my real name, I'm thumping my friend on the leg going, it's the Master, it's the Master, it's the Master. He doesn't have a clue what I'm talking about, like, yeah, okay, whatever. And then he said it, and I still love watching that. I try and pretend that I don't know what's coming and try and relive that moment, that feeling of anticipation, knowing, hoping you're right, and then having it revealed that you are. You can't recreate that. But then you got the sound of drums, and the sound of drums is weak, it's silly, it's fun. I don't dislike it, but it falls flat by comparison. And the silliness of reverting the Doctor's lives. I thought the Master's trick was always decompression, tissue decompression, not aging people. That didn't seem right, and the effects were... Well, the effects were brilliant, but what the effects were visualising wasn't that well imagined. But then we got The Last of the Time Lords and Martha's epic journey. Some of the best music of the season, overplayed with her getting off the boat and meeting Tom, or whatever his name was. The reveal of the Toglophane as being humans. Just the epicness of that. The whole, even though it wasn't real, the whole purpose of her journey, even though it was a decoy, it was just brilliant. It was so well conceived, and then they ruined it by that archangel nonsense at the end. And okay, I suspended belief and I was wowing with the rest of them, but on reflection it was a little bit silly. And because this is a three-parter, as I said, Utopia on its own would be #1 by a country mile. But with the other 2 episodes tagged on, I can't justify it as anything less than a 3. Anything more than a 3. At #2 is what most people think is going to be #1. Directed by Hetty MacDonald and written by the Moff himself. It is one of Moffat's best stories. It is Blink. I understand that this would be #1 in most people's list. It would be #1 in my list 2 or 3 years ago. I thought it was one of the most imaginative stories I'd seen on NuWho up to that point. The angels were just so well conceived. I hardly even notice on the first time I watched it that it was Dr. Light. Just the inclusion of the video screens and the messages through the DVDs was just genius. All based on a short story by Stephen Moffat. Carey Mulligan makes up for the lack of David Tennant absolutely brilliantly. What else can I say? It's lost its lustre over the years. It was a one-shot episode, really, that I think it stands the test of time over multiple watches. The trouble is the angels don't. The angels were truly terrifying, truly scary in this episode. The part where the Rory prototype guy was staring at the angel that was, and Sally Sparrow was running around the house looking for a way out, and then he turns his head quickly and suddenly the angel is right there, right in front of him. I jumped. I may have soiled myself. That was a terrifying moment. But later seasons spoilt the angels. They should have been a one-shot villain. They were overused. A second time was overusing them. And that was unfortunate because it's kind of retrograded the score of this episode, if you see what I mean. It makes this their continued use made this episode less than what it used to be to me. And that's why it's at number 2. Which means that at number 1 is the very excellent Human Nature Family of Blood. Directed by Charles Palmer and written by Phil Cornwell. Phil Cornwell, or is it Phil Cornell? I never know. The story of John Smith. The getting to know these boys that we know are going to go off and fight in the Great War. The whole idea of the family of blood being these very, very short-lived creatures that require the Doctor's regeneration energy and remaining lives in order just to survive. And the punishment that the Doctor deals out to the family once it's all concluded. All of these make this episode one of the best, hands down. And this is, it's a two-parter that kind of I liked but wasn't overly enthusiastic about the first time I watched it. It grew on me over multiple watches. Harry Lloyd and Thomas Sangster from Game of Thrones was an added bonus. Harry Lloyd, who plays Viserys in Game of Thrones, his character in this was brilliant. And Thomas Sangster's character, who played Jojen in Game of Thrones, he was fantastic as well. His character was more sad and more tragic than I think I can possibly describe. There was just something about his character and the way he acted it, and that just seemed just so beautiful. It was, and seeing the ending with them in the war, it's so emotional. But it was Time Lord vengeance that really got me. It's this that really cemented this episode as the best of the season for me. The revenge that, or the punishment that the Doctor delivers to the family of blood, giving them an eternal death sentence. Yeah, life imprisonment without possibility of parole and forever. That is some dark shit there. Sorry for swearing, but that is some darkness there. And it is perfectly in keeping with Classic Who, because in Classic Who there were a couple of storylines where aliens tried to steal technology from the Time Lords, and their punishments were always extremely harsh. Extremely harsh. Like that harsh. Like trapping you in a mirror or chaining you up in unbreakable chains and throwing you into a singularity. That sort of harsh. And I'm so glad that they kept that in there. Like for all of David Tennant, because the family didn't deserve that. Let's face it, they were trying to survive. They killed some people, yes, they did, and they were a little bit callous about it, yes, true. But I'm quite sympathetic to the family. They were doing what any creature would do to survive. And the Doctor should have just defeated them, sent them on the way. You know, that would have been just. That would have been fair. But the Time Lord in him, the knowing that Time Lords do not suffer other races stealing their technology, and that's what they essentially were doing in stealing his regenerations. They were stealing Time Lord technology. And something in him, I think, just clicked, and you see it on his face when he's dealing the punishment. It's so passive, so cold. Like he knows what he's doing is wrong, but everything inside him tells him that that is the only way, that this is the only punishment that will fit. Quite heavy, really. Aside from that, Nurse Redfern, oh, Jessica Hines, loved Jessica Hines. I loved her when she was in Spaced. I loved her in Shaun of the Dead, and was she in the follow-ups? I can't remember. But yeah, Jessica Hines, fantastic. As Nurse Redfern, and the most beautiful scene of all, the end where David Tennant gets to experience, or the Doctor gets to experience what his life would have been like had he just remained human and married Nurse Redfern, Joan. And then knowing he has to give that up, to sacrifice that. Think about that. That is truly beautiful, isn't it? Season 3 isn't the strongest season of Doctor Who so far, but it has some really cracking episodes. I'm sorry if I've poured scorn on your favourite episodes. These are just my favourites. This is just my ranking. I love Doctor Who in all its various forms, and even the ones in these rankings that I absolutely slate, I still rewatch them. I've still got them on DVD, so there is no hate. And of course, it's only my opinion. You've got your other lists. I'd be curious to find out what they are. Drop us a note if you wish, down in the comments. Right, I've got to get on with season 4's ranking now, so I will see you soon. Thank you for watching, and thank you for these lovely people who have definitely made this video possible. Catch you next time. Keep well. Bye bye.